I've been waiting a long time to tell someone about this, and I still don't know if telling it is going to help anything, or if it's just going to make me sound like I lost something up on that mountain that I haven't been able to find since. But I need to say it out loud, or as close to out loud as this recording allows, because the alternative is sitting with it for another winter, and I don't think I can do that again. My name's not important. What matters is that between April and August of 2019, I was the primary structural contractor on a historic preservation project for a fire lookout tower in the Southern Oregon Cascades. I won't name the specific tower or the exact drainage it sits in, but I'll say this much. It's on a peak just under 6,000 feet, accessible by a Forest Service road that hasn't been properly graded in over a decade. And the tower itself is a 1936 L4 cab on a 40-foot steel air motor frame. Standard CCC-era construction, hip roof, heavy wooden shutters on extended ceiling joist bolts, 14 by 14 cab with the original catwalk still intact around the exterior. The Forest Service decommissioned it from active fire detection in 2003. A local historical society partnered with the district to restore it as an interpretive site. Not a rental, not a staffed position, just a place hikers could visit, read some plaques, maybe look through the original Osborne Firefinder if it was still mountable. That was the project I bid on. Structural assessment, shutter repair, catwalk reinforcement, and a full interior restoration of the cab to approximate its last operational condition. I'd been doing this kind of work for about 6 years at that point. Historic structures, mostly in the Pacific Northwest old ranger stations, a couple of Depression-era shelters, one CCC-built bridge in the Gifford Pinchot. I'm a carpenter by training, but the historic work requires a different eye. You're not just building, you're reading what someone else built decades ago, with different lumber and different fasteners and different expectations about how long anything was supposed to last. You learn to look at a joint and understand not just how it was made, but why it was made that way, and what it's been carrying since. I want to be clear about something. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in curses. I don't think forests are haunted. I've spent hundreds of nights alone in remote structures, some of them in much worse condition than this tower. And the only thing that's ever scared me is a rotten beam giving way under my boot. What happened on that project didn't change my mind about any of that. What it did was show me that there are things you can find inside a structure that have nothing to do with the supernatural and everything to do with a specific person making a specific decision to hide something where only someone doing exactly my job would ever find it. And I think that person was right to hide it. And I think I was wrong to keep looking after I found it. If you want to subscribe to this channel, go ahead and do that now. I need a minute before I get into the details. The access road to the tower branches off a paved forest route about 40 miles from the nearest town. It's a single-lane gravel track, fairly well maintained for the first 3 miles because there's a trailhead at the end. But the spur that leads to the tower itself hasn't been touched. The district ranger told me during our initial walkthrough that no maintenance vehicle had been up that spur since 2011, when they'd sent a crew to check the tower's structural integrity after a heavy snow year. He said the crew reported the tower was standing but deteriorated, and that was the last official contact. I drove up in late April of 2019. Still some snow in the shaded cuts on the road. The spur was passable in my truck, but barely 2 downed trees I had to buck out with my saw. And the road surface had washed out badly in one section near the top. When I finally reached the small clearing where the tower stood, my first impression was that the structure was in better shape than I'd expected from the report. The air motor legs were solid, minimal rust considering the exposure. The staircase 4 flights, standard open-tread steel, looked complete. The cab itself was weathered but intact. I spent that first day just doing the exterior assessment, walking the perimeter, photographing every connection point on the tower frame, checking the concrete footings, rattling each staircase railing. Nothing remarkable. The shutters were all closed and latched from the inside, which was standard for a decommissioned lookout you close up before you leave for the last time. The catwalk planking showed rot in about a third of the boards, mostly on the north exposure where moisture sits longest. I made notes, took measurements, and drove back down before dark. The second day I went up into the cab for the first time. The trapdoor in the floor was the only interior access. Standard L4 configuration, you come up through the floor into the center of the room. I had to force it slightly. The wood had swollen over 16 winters of sitting closed. When it opened, the smell that came down was what I expected. Closed air, mouse droppings, old varnish. The mineral smell of the firefinder's metal base. I climbed up and stood in the middle of the cab and just looked. Everything was exactly where it should have been. The Osborne firefinder on its center pedestal, covered in dust but undisturbed. The built-in cot frame along the east wall. The small wood stove in the corner with its pipe running up and through the roof. A table, a chair, both fixed to the floor. The windows on all four sides, behind their heavy shutters, letting in only thin lines of light where the shutter edges had warped slightly over the years. The whole room was dim and cool and still, and it smelled like a place that had been waiting without knowing what it was waiting for. On the table, there was a logbook. Green canvas cover, Forest Service Standard issue. I opened it and found entries running from June through September of 2003, which would have been the tower's final operational season. The handwriting was steady, small, and precise. Daily weather observations, temperature, humidity, wind speed and direction, cloud type and coverage. Smoke reports, mostly negative. Visibility readings, occasional notes about wildlife, a bear in the lower meadow, a pair of red-tailed hawks nesting in the snag to the northeast. The last entry was dated September 14th, 2003. It read, closed shutters, secured stove, instruments stowed, leaving by 0900. Roads should be clear. Final season. That was it. Final season. The end of 67 years of continuous summer staffing. I set the logbook aside and began my interior assessment. The walls were in decent condition. Some water damage near the northeast corner where a shutter seal had failed at some point, but the framing was sound. The floor was solid. The ceiling showed no signs of leaking. I checked every joint, every connection, every place where the cab structure met the tower frame below it. I measured. I documented. Standard work. It was when I started assessing the catwalk from below, lying on my back on the cab floor, with my head through the trap door, looking up at the underside of the exterior deck planking, that I noticed something that didn't belong. The catwalk on an L4 cab is essentially a narrow deck that wraps around all four sides of the structure, about 30 inches wide, supported by joists that extend out from the cab's floor frame. The planking is laid across these joists from the outside, but when you look at it from underneath it, from inside the cab, through the trapdoor gap, you can see the underside of those planks and the bottom edges of the joists. On the south-facing section, directly above where the trapdoor opening allowed a view, someone had carved into the underside of one of the catwalk planks, not deeply, just enough to leave marks in the soft, old-growth fur, and not with a knife. The marks had the rounded profile of something like a nail head or possibly the tip of a screwdriver, pressed and dragged repeatedly across the grain. The light was bad. I got my headlamp and shone it up there. It was text, small, deliberate, compressed into maybe a 14-inch section of the plank's underside. The grain of the wood made it hard to read, and 16 years of temperature cycling had opened and closed the fibers enough to partially obscure some characters, but I could make out most of it. It said, "If you are reading this, you are underneath, and that means you are fixing the deck, and that means they are sending someone back up here. Do not stay past dark. Do not open the north shutter after the first week of August. If you hear the stove ticking when there is no fire, you need to go down the stairs and not come back until sunrise." I am sorry, I cannot be more specific. I do not understand it either. I just know what the pattern is. Please believe me. I lay there for a long time with my headlamp shining on those words. My first thought was that it was a joke. Lookouts have a long tradition of leaving messages for their successors' notes tucked into logbooks, names scratched into window frames, little stashes of whiskey hidden in the stovepipe. It's part of the culture. Someone spending 5 months alone on a mountaintop is going to leave their mark. And some of those marks are going to be weird, because being alone that long makes people weird. But 2 things bothered me about this one. The first was the placement. This wasn't a message meant to be found casually. It wasn't in the logbook. It wasn't scratched into the wall where the next lookout would see it on the first day. It was on the underside of an exterior deck plank, only visible from inside the cab if you were lying on your back, looking up through the trap door with a light source. The only person who would ever see it was someone doing exactly what I was doing, structural assessment from below. Someone taking the catwalk apart or inspecting it for repair. The second thing was the handwriting in the logbook, the careful, precise, small lettering. And the carving on the plank also small, also precise, also careful, compressed into the space available with the same economy. It looked like the same hand. The last lookout. The person who wrote "Final Season" in the logbook on September 14th, 2003, also carved a warning into the underside of the deck they knew someone would eventually need to repair. They hid it in the one place where only a specific type of professional, performing a specific task, years or decades later, would find it. They weren't writing to the next lookout. There wasn't going to be a next lookout. They were writing to me, or someone like me. I should have found it strange and then moved on. That would have been the professional response. Note it as a historical curiosity, maybe photograph it for the society's records, and continue with the assessment. Instead, I sat up on the cab floor and looked around the room again with different eyes. Do not stay past dark. Do not open the north shutter after the first week of August. If you hear the stove ticking when there is no fire. It was April. I wasn't going to be here in August. The shutters were all closed and were going to stay closed until I could assess the window frames and hardware. And I had no intention of staying past dark. The drive back down that spur road in the dark would be genuinely dangerous regardless of any carved warnings. But I want to be honest with you. I wasn't scared. I was curious. The same curiosity that makes me good at my job, the need to read a structure, to understand what it's telling me, to find the story in the joinery. That same instinct grabbed onto this and would not let go. Over the next 3 days, I completed my initial assessment and began drafting the work plan. Catwalk replacement was going to be the largest single task. Roughly 60% of the deck planking needed to come out, which meant I was going to be removing the plank with the carving on it. I thought about that. I thought about whether to leave it in place, or to salvage it separately, or to simply note it and let it go with the old wood. I decided to look for more. On my 4th day, I brought a mirror and a stronger light. I checked the underside of every accessible deck plank from below. I found nothing else on the east, west, or south sections. The north section wasn't visible from the trap door. The angle was wrong. So I went outside, onto the catwalk itself, and I started checking the planks from above, pulling at the edges with a pry bar, just enough to peek at the undersides without fully removing them. It took most of the morning to work my way around. East side nothing, west side nothing. South side I already knew about that one. North side. Third plank from the cab wall, counting outward toward the railing. More text. Same style, same tool, same compressed lettering. Harder to read because of more weathering on the north exposure. 17 summers I came up here. 14 of them clean. The other 3 I cannot account for. My logbook says I was here. My entries are in my writing. But I was not here. You will not believe this, but I need to say it. The days my logbook recorded between August 8th and August 11th of 1997 did not happen to me. I went to sleep on the 7th and woke up on the 12th. And there were 5 entries in the book in my own hand, and I did not write them. This happened again in 2001 and in 2003. The last time was 3 days before I closed the shutters for the last time. I reported nothing. Who would I report it to? I sat on that catwalk for a long time. The sun was on me. I could see the whole drainage below, the dark green of the timber, the gray-blue ridgeline beyond. A red-tailed hawk making slow circles maybe 1,000 feet below my elevation. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly what it should have been. And I was sitting on a structure that contained hidden testimony from a person who'd spent 17 years in this exact spot, and was telling me, with great care and precision, that something had used his hands to write while he was absent from his own body. I need to say clearly, I did not believe this. I still don't believe it in the way I think he meant it. People have fugue states. People lose time. 17 years alone on a mountain for 5 months every summer can do things to a person's memory that have nothing to do with anything supernatural. I'm not qualified to diagnose anything, but I know that isolation and routine can blur days together. And I know that a person who realizes they've lost time will construct explanations that fit the shape of their fear rather than the shape of the evidence. But the warning was real. The hiding of it was real. The choice to carve it into the only surface a future repair crew would access, that was the work of a rational mind. Not a person in crisis. A person making a deliberate, calculated decision about how to transmit information across years to a specific recipient. And I was the recipient. And it was only April. And I had 4 months of work ahead of me on this tower. I started keeping my own notes. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because the thing about working alone on a remote structure for months is that your perception of normal shifts gradually. You don't notice it happening. A sound that would have startled you on day 1 becomes background by day 15. A shadow that looked wrong the first time you saw it becomes just the way the light falls at that hour. And that process, that normalization, is the thing I now believe the warning was actually about. Not a single dramatic event, not a monster, not a ghost. The slow, patient rearrangement of what you're willing to accept. I set up my base camp about a quarter-mile below the tower at a wide spot where the spur road leveled out. I had my truck, a wall tent, a propane stove, and enough supplies for 2-week rotations. I'd work 10 or 12 days, drive down to town for supplies and showers, then come back up. The project timeline had me finishing by mid-August, with a final inspection scheduled for early September. For the first 6 weeks, all of May and into early June, the work was entirely normal. I replaced the concrete footing on the southwest leg. I stripped and treated the steel frame. I rebuilt the staircase railing on the 3rd flight where corrosion had weakened the welds. I replaced the cab's trap door with a new one milled to the same dimensions. And I started pulling the catwalk planking on the south and east sides. Every plank I removed, I checked the underside. Every joist I exposed, I examined. I found nothing else. No more carvings. No hidden messages. Just old-growth fur doing what old-growth fur does after decades of weather, checking along the grain, softening where water sat longest, but holding its shape in the way that only wood from a 200-year-old tree can hold. I saved the 2 carved planks, set them aside in my truck bed, wrapped in a tarp. I told myself it was because the Historical Society might want them for the interpretive display. That was partly true. But mostly, I wanted them where I could look at them again. During this period, I also did some research. The district ranger had given me a file of tower records as part of the project documentation, maintenance histories, staffing lists, that sort of thing. I went through it, looking for the last lookout's name. Found it easily enough. The staffing records showed the same person assigned to the tower for 17 consecutive seasons, 1987 through 2003. I'll call him Ellison, because that's not his real name, but it's close enough in feel. Ellison had no other entries in the file. No incident reports, no disciplinary notes, no commendations. Just 17 lines on the staffing list, each one a year, each one the same name next to the same tower. The consistency itself was notable. Most lookouts I've encountered in these records rotated between towers or served 5 or 10 years and moved on. 17 seasons at one tower was unusual. It suggested either a person with an extraordinary attachment to the place or a posting no one else wanted. I thought about driving down to the district office to ask about him, whether he was still alive, whether anyone remembered him. But something held me back. I think it was the last line of the first carving. Please believe me. A person who writes that is a person who expects not to be believed. And a person who hides the message, rather than delivering it openly, is a person who has decided that the official channels, the supervisors, the dispatchers, the district office, are not where this information belongs. He'd chosen his audience. I didn't want to betray that choice by going to the people he'd deliberately excluded. June deepened. The days got long. I was working 12, sometimes 14 hours, because at that latitude and that time of year, you have usable light until nearly 10 at night. The catwalk was coming along. I'd completed the south and east sides and started on the west. The north side, the side with the second carving, I'd been saving. I told myself it was a sequencing decision. The north side had the most rot, needed the most joist work, and I wanted to be confident in my approach before I started pulling it apart. That was the reason I gave myself. The real reason was that the second carving mentioned the north shutter. And some part of me had connected those 2 pieces of geography, north shutter, north deck, into a zone I wasn't ready to enter yet. I need to tell you about the north shutter. All 8 shutters on the cab, 2 per side, are identical in construction. They're heavy. Solid fir frames with tongue and groove panel inserts, hung from the extended ceiling joists on bolt hinges so that they swing up and out and latch open against the overhang of the roof. When closed, they're held by simple hook-and-eye latches on the interior. When I'd first entered the cab in April, all 8 shutters were closed and latched from inside, as expected. When I began the interior restoration work in mid-June, I started opening them to let light and air into the cab while I worked. I opened the south pair first, then east, then west. The hardware was stiff but functional. Each one took a few minutes of work penetrating oil on the hinges, a gentle push from inside, then climbing out onto the catwalk to prop and latch them in their open position. I left the north pair closed. Again, I told myself practical reasons. The north side got the worst weather. The window frames on that side needed more work before I exposed them. I didn't want rain driving in while the sealant was curing. All of which was true. None of which was the real reason. By late June, I'd been on the project for about 9 weeks, and the work had settled into a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Wake at 5:30, coffee on the propane stove. Hike the 1/4 mile up to the tower. Climb the 4 flights of stairs. Work until noon. Eat lunch on the catwalk with my legs hanging over the south side, looking out over the drainage. Work until 8 or 9, hike back down. Dinner, sleep, repeat. And somewhere in there, I couldn't tell you the exact day, I started noticing the stove. The wood stove in the cab's corner is a small cast-iron box model, standard Forest Service issue for lookout cabs. The pipe runs up through a metal thimble in the roof. It hadn't been used since 2003, and I wasn't using it either. I had no reason to. The cab was comfortable enough in June without heat, and I wasn't sleeping up there. The stove was part of the historic fabric I was preserving, not something I intended to operate. But cast iron does something in a structure with that much thermal cycling. The cab heats up in direct sunlight considerably on a south-facing day, and then cools rapidly after sunset. Metal expands and contracts. In a structure that's mostly wood, the stove and its pipe are the main metal masses, and they respond to temperature changes faster and more audibly than the wood does, which means they tick. Small, irregular sounds. Pings. The kind of noise an engine makes after you turn it off. I know this. I've worked around old stoves in dozens of structures. It's one of the most mundane sounds in the world. The warning said, if you hear the stove ticking when there is no fire, you need to go down the stairs and not come back until sunrise. For the first few weeks, I heard the ticking and felt nothing. It was thermal expansion. It was physics. It was June, and the cab was cycling between 60 and 90 degrees every day. The iron was doing what iron does. What I noticed, and this is the thing that's hard to describe without sounding like I'm building towards something I'm not, was that the pattern changed. Thermal ticking is random. It's governed by differential cooling rates across an uneven surface. There's no rhythm to it, no repetition. It's like rain on a roof, individual events, each one independent, each one caused by a unique micropoint of stress releasing. On June 28th, I remember the date because I'd just come back from a town run and was checking my notes. I was up in the cab working on the west window frame. It was about 7 in the evening. The sun was off the cab, but the air was still warm, and the stove was ticking. And the ticking was even, not fast. Maybe once every 4 or 5 seconds, but regular, metronomic. I stopped what I was doing and listened, and I counted. 1 tick, 5 seconds, another tick, 5 seconds, another tick, 5 seconds. I counted 14 ticks in a row, evenly spaced, before the pattern broke and returned to random. I walked over to the stove, touched it. It was warm, but not unusually so. The pipe was the same. I looked at the firebox, the damper, the legs. Everything was as it had been. I went back to my window frame and worked for another hour. The ticking returned to its random baseline pattern and stayed there. I wrote in my notebook that night, stove ticking, regular interval observed, approximately 5 seconds, duration approximately 70 seconds. Thermal anomaly. Check for pipe obstruction or loose component. The next day I inspected the stovepipe from the roof. Clean, secure. No obstructions, no loose fittings. The stove itself was solid. No cracked seams. No worn-out components that might settle rhythmically under expansion. I wrapped the pipe at several points and listened to the ring. Normal. I did not hear the regular ticking again for 11 days. On July 9th, it happened again. Same time of evening, between 7 and 8. Same interval, approximately 5 seconds between ticks. This time I counted 9 before it stopped. I was closer to the stove this time, sitting at the table writing up my daily work notes. The sound was definitely coming from the stove body itself, not the pipe, not the damper. The flat top surface, or possibly the side panel nearest the north wall. I wrote it down. I also wrote down what the temperature had been that day. The high and the low, the cloud cover, the wind direction. I thought maybe there was a specific thermal condition that produced the regularity. A resonance frequency. Some combination of ambient temperature and cooling rate that created even spacing in the contraction events. I did not think about the warning. That's not true. I thought about the warning constantly. But I was able, at that point, to hold both thoughts simultaneously. This is a physical phenomenon with a physical explanation. And a person who spent 17 years here told me to leave when this happened, without letting either one dominate. I was interested. I was documenting. I was being the careful observer that my profession requires. What I was not doing was leaving. July continued. I finished the west catwalk. I completed the interior window frames on 3 sides. I began the floor restoration, sanding, sealing, replacing 2 boards near the stove that had been scorched at some point. The work was good. I was ahead of schedule. On July 14th, I opened the north shutters. I had finished the north window frames the day before. The sealant was cured. There was no more reason to leave them closed. And I was tired of working in that partial dimness on the north side of the cab. Tired of using my headlamp for detailed work when there was perfectly good daylight 6 inches away behind a wooden panel. I unlatched the east side north shutter first. The hook and eye released easily. I pushed the shutter up and out on its hinges. Daylight flooded in, the gray-green of the north slope below. Dense conifers running down into the drainage bottom where a creek ran that I could sometimes hear on still mornings. Then the west side north shutter. Same procedure. Push, swing, latch. The cab was now fully open on all 4 sides. For the first time since 2003, every window was exposed to the outside. The room was transformed bright, airy, connected to the landscape in every direction. I stood in the center and turned slowly, looking out at 360 degrees of wilderness. And I understood completely why someone would come back to this room for 17 consecutive summers. Nothing happened. I want to be clear about that. I opened the north shutters and nothing happened. No sound, no event, no change in the air, no feeling of wrongness. The day continued normally. I worked until 9. I hiked back down. I slept fine. But the next morning, July 15th, when I came up the stairs and through the trap door, the logbook was open. Not my notebook, I kept that in my pack. The original logbook, the green canvas one with Ellison's entries from 2003. I'd left it on the table after first examining it back in April, and I hadn't touched it since. It had been closed. I was certain it had been closed. Now it was open, approximately to the middle. Face down, spine up, like someone had been reading it and set it down to hold their place. I stood there looking at it for maybe a full minute before I picked it up. When I turned it over, it was open to a page in early August. August 8th, 2003. The first date Ellison had mentioned in his carved warning, the beginning of the window, he said he couldn't account for. The entry for August 8th read, "Clear. Temp at 0800. 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind SW 5 to 8. Humidity 32%. Visibility unlimited. No smoke." Observed unusual light movement on north slope at approximately 21:30. Likely headlamp of late hiker on PCT spur. No further activity. August 9th. Clear. Temperature at 0800, 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind southwest 3 to 5. Humidity 28%. Visibility unlimited. No smoke. North slope light observed again at 21:45. Steady, not moving. Duration approximately 40 minutes. Not a headlamp. Too steady and too white. Source appears to be at or near the tree line at approximately 5,200 feet elevation. No trail in that area. August 10th. Clear. Temp at 0800. 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind calm. Humidity 31%. Visibility unlimited. No smoke. Light observed third consecutive night. Same location, same duration, same quality. I used the firefinder to take a bearing. 357 degrees true. Walked the bearing on the map. Location corresponds to no trail, no structure, no road. The slope at that bearing and elevation is dense second-growth timber, no clearing. There should be nothing there to produce a light of that intensity. I am noting this officially in case it becomes relevant to a future report. August 11th. Clear. Temp at 0800. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind and W2 to 4. Humidity 29%. Visibility unlimited. No smoke. That was the entire entry for the 11th. No mention of the light. No elaboration. Just the standard weather observation, and then nothing. I stood in the cab reading those entries and feeling something rearrange in my chest. Because Ellison had carved that he went to sleep on the 7th and woke up on the 12th. That the entries between those dates were in his hand, but not written by him. And yet, here they were, careful, detailed, observationally precise, noting a specific anomaly with professional thoroughness. If he didn't write them, then something that could perfectly replicate his penmanship, his observational vocabulary, and his procedural habits had written 4 days of logbook entries describing a phenomenon on the north slope. And if he did write them and simply couldn't remember doing so, then what happened during those 4 nights that erased his memory of recording something that clearly interested him enough to take a bearing on it? Either way, the logbook had been closed, and now it was open. I need to address the obvious explanations, wind through the cab possible, since the shutters were now open, but the logbook had sat undisturbed for months with the south, east, and west shutters open, a mouse or other animal possible. But the book wasn't just fallen open, it was placed face down, which would require more than a passing nudge. My own action that I forgot possible, I suppose, though I had no memory of opening it and no reason to. I closed the book. I set a small piece of scrap wood on top of it as a telltale. I continued my work. The scrap wood was still in place the next morning, and the next. The logbook stayed closed for 11 days. On July 26th, I started pulling the north catwalk planking. This was the most deteriorated section, as I'd expected. The joists had moisture damage that extended deeper than I'd hoped. 2 of them needed full replacement rather than just sistering. The planking came up in pieces. In some cases, the fasteners had corroded enough that the wood split around them rather than releasing cleanly. I was pulling the 4th plank, counting from the cab wall outward, when I found the 3rd carving. It was longer than the other 2. It covered the underside of 2 adjacent planks, continuing from one to the next, as though the writer had run out of space and simply moved to the neighboring surface. The same nail head or screwdriver tip tool. The same compressed lettering. But this one was different in tone. The light on the north slope is real. It is there every night in August. I have confirmed this across 3 separate seasons, 1997, 2001, 2003. It appears between 2100 and 2200 and lasts between 30 and 50 minutes. It does not move. It is white and steady. It has no visible source from below. I attempted to hike to the bearing point in August of 2001 during daylight. The location is a small flat bench in the timber at approximately 5,200 feet. There is nothing there. No clearing, no structure, no reflective surface. The bench is maybe 40 feet across and covered in a thick duff layer with mature hemlock and fir. I found no evidence of any human activity or any natural source of light. The 3 seasons I observed the light are the 3 seasons I lost time. I am certain these are connected. I do not know the mechanism. I do not know if the light causes the absence or if both are symptoms of something else. I know only that when the light appears and I'm watching it from the north window, I lose continuity with myself and find it again days later with records I do not remember making. I'm telling you this because you are taking this deck apart, and that means you are close to the north window, and it may be August. If it is August, stop working. Close the north shutters. Do not look at the north slope after dark. I am not joking, and I am not crazy. I spent 17 years on this mountain, and I loved this work, and I loved this place. And the only reason I agreed to let it be my last season is because I understood that one more August might take more than 3 days from me. I sat on the exposed joists of the half-dismantled north catwalk, and I read those words 3 times. The sun was on my back. It was July 26th, 6 days from August. That evening, back at my camp, I made a decision that I've thought about every day since. I decided to stay through August. I decided to leave the north shutters open. I decided that if there was a light on the north slope, I was going to see it, and I was going to do what Ellison apparently could not. I was going to watch it and remain present and remember what I saw. I was not the 17th lookout. I was not isolated for 5 months. I was a contractor with a truck and a cell phone and a road back to town. Whatever had affected Ellison across those years, whatever combination of isolation and repetition and fixation had made him vulnerable to losing time. I was not subject to those conditions. I was an outsider, a visitor, a professional with a defined scope of work and an end date. I could observe without being observed, or so I believed. I finished the north catwalk replacement by July 30th. New planks, new fasteners, new joist sections were needed. Clean, solid work. I sealed the carved planks in plastic and put them in my truck with the first one. 3 pieces of old-growth fir with a dead man's testimony on them. On August 1st, I began sleeping in the cab. I told myself it was practical. I was entering the finish phase of the interior restoration, doing detailed work that benefited from being on site at first light, rather than hiking up from below. I brought my sleeping bag, my pad, a headlamp, my water and food. I slept on the restored cot frame against the east wall. The north shutters were open. All the shutters were open. The cab was a glass room in the sky. And at night, with no artificial light, you could see everything: the stars, the ridgelines, the dark mass of the timber below, and on the north slope, whatever there was to see. August 1st through August 6th. Nothing. Clear nights, warm days, detailed finishing work on the floor and window trim. I looked at the north slope every night before I slept. I saw darkness. I heard the normal sounds wind in the tower frame, the random thermal ticking of the stove as the cab cooled, the occasional call of a great horned owl somewhere in the drainage below. August 7th. I finished my work around 9. The sun was down, but the sky still held a thin blue light at the horizon. I ate dinner sitting on the catwalk on the south side, watching the color drain out of the sky. Then I went inside, used my headlamp to organize my tools for the next day, and turned it off. I lay on the cot in the dark. The cab was cooling. The stove was ticking randomly, irregularly, normally. At some point, I think around 9:30, but I didn't check, the ticking became regular. 5 seconds between each tick. Precise, mechanical, as though someone were tapping the stove with a fingertip at counted intervals. I lay in the dark and listened and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The count continued. I lost track somewhere around 20. The rhythm was hypnotic in a way that the random ticking never was. It pulled my attention toward it and held it there, and I realized I'd been staring at the dark shape of the stove. In the corner, without blinking for what felt like a very long time. I turned my head away, looked toward the north window. There was a light on the north slope. It was exactly as Ellison had described it. White, steady, unmoving. Not a flashlight, not a headlamp, not a campfire. It had no flicker to it, no variation in intensity. It was simply there, a point of cold white light in the dark timber at what I estimated to be roughly 1,000 feet below my elevation. On the north-facing slope where no trail ran and no structure existed. I sat up on the cot. The stove was still ticking its even rhythm. I swung my feet to the floor and stood and walked to the north window and looked. From the cab, looking down and north, the light sat in the trees like a star that had come to rest on the canopy. It illuminated nothing around it. It cast no visible beam, created no pool of brightness on the surrounding timber. It was a point source with no diffusion, which is not how light behaves when it passes through air and particulate matter. Any real light source in a forest at night creates a halo, a glow in the moisture and dust. This did not. I picked up my binoculars from the table. I focused on the bearing, approximately 357 degrees, exactly where Ellison's firefinder reading had placed it. Through magnification, the light remained a point. It did not resolve into a shape or a source. It simply became a brighter point against the same black background, as though distance and magnification were irrelevant to it. I stood at that window and watched for what I believe was between 30 and 40 minutes. The light did not move. It did not dim. It did not change in any observable way. And during the entire time I watched, the stove behind me continued its metronomic ticking, 5 seconds between each pulse, never varying. I was aware of myself. I want to be clear about that. I did not lose time that night. I did not enter a fugue state. I was completely, almost painfully present, aware of my breathing, aware of the plank floor under my bare feet, aware of the temperature dropping in the cab, aware of the precise number of minutes passing because I was counting the stove ticks and dividing by 12 to get minutes. I was there. I was watching. I was remembering. At approximately 10:15 again, estimated by tick count, the light went out. Not gradually, not like a bulb dimming or a fire dying. It simply ceased. One moment it existed, and the next moment it did not. And the slope was dark and featureless again. The stove ticking returned to random within seconds of the light disappearing. I stood at the window for another 10 minutes, watching. Nothing. The normal darkness of a forested slope at night. I went back to the cot. I did not sleep for a long time. When I did sleep, I slept normally and woke at my usual time with full memory of the previous evening intact. I sat up and looked around the cab. The logbook was still closed, the wood scraps still on top of it. My tools were where I'd left them. My notebook was in my pack. Everything was ordinary. I wrote everything down immediately. Time estimates, duration, description, behavior of the stove, my own physical and mental state throughout. I was meticulous. I treated it like a field report because that was the only framework I had for processing what I'd seen. Then I did something that, looking back, I think was the first mistake. I took the firefinder bearing myself. The Osborne was still mounted on its pedestal in the center of the cab. I hadn't restored it, that was outside my scope, a job for a specialist, but it was still mechanically functional. The sighting vane moved freely. The compass ring was readable. I lined up the rear peep sight and the front crosshair on the spot where I'd seen the light. On the north slope, at the elevation I estimated. 357 degrees true. The same bearing Ellison had recorded in August of 2003. To the degree. I spent that day working. I finished the interior trim. I cleaned and sealed the floor a final time. I checked every joint and fastener on the catwalk. The work was nearly done. I had maybe 3 days of finishing tasks remaining. And then the final inspection with the district ranger and the Historical Society representative. I could have packed up. I could have declared the project functionally complete and come back for the details after the inspection date was confirmed. I stayed. That night, August 8th, I was in the cab again at dark, lying on the cot, stove ticking randomly, waiting. At 9:22 by my watch, I checked. This time the ticking became regular. 5-second intervals. I turned my head to the north window. The light was there. Same position, same quality, same everything. White, steady, point source, no diffusion, no movement. I got up and stood at the window. I watched. I timed it on my watch rather than counting ticks. 37 minutes. Then it ceased, instantly, and the stove returned to random. I was present the entire time, no lost time, no memory gaps. Full continuity of experience. August 9th, same, 9:19. 34 minutes. Present throughout. August 10th, same, 9:25, 41 minutes. Present throughout. 4 consecutive nights. I was doing what Ellison said he could not do, watching and remaining, observing and remembering. Whatever had taken his continuity during these August windows was not taking mine. I was the outsider, the visitor, the one who hadn't spent 17 years being patterned by this place. I was immune. I wrote that in my notebook on the morning of August 11th. I think the difference is duration of exposure. Ellison was here so long that something about his neurological patterns synchronized with whatever this is. I've been here 4 months. I'm not entrained. I can watch without consequence. I felt triumphant writing that. I felt like I'd solved something, not what the light was, but why it had affected Ellison and not me. The answer was simple. Habituation. He'd been absorbed into the rhythm of the place over 17 years. And whatever the light was, some geomagnetic phenomenon, some atmospheric condition specific to this drainage in August, it could only affect a nervous system that had been tuned to its frequency over long exposure. I was safe. I was just a contractor. I'd be gone in a week. On the afternoon of August 11th, I was doing the final check on the south catwalk, walking each plank, testing each fastener, looking for any missed details before calling the job complete. The sun was high and warm. I was moving slowly, methodically, checking my work with the satisfaction of a job nearly done. I looked down at the plank beneath my feet, one of the new ones. Tight-grained Douglas fir, freshly sealed, installed by my own hands 6 weeks earlier. There were marks on the underside. I could see them because the plank had a very slight gap at one edge, where the wood had already begun its first season of movement, a hairline space between it and its neighbor, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Not enough to see through in any meaningful way, but enough. When the sun was at exactly the right angle to catch the shadow of something on the underside surface that shouldn't have been there. I got my pry bar. I lifted the edge of the plank, just enough to get a mirror and a light underneath. There was text carved into the underside of my new plank. The same tool marks, the same compressed lettering, the same hand. Except this plank had been in my truck, then in my staging area, then installed by me personally 6 weeks ago. No one else had been on this mountain. No one else had access to my materials. The plank had been smooth and clean on both sides when I fastened it down. My hands were shaking. I pried the plank up fully and turned it over in the sunlight. The carving read, "You stayed past August 7th. You think you are immune because you remember. You are not immune. You have been writing in the logbook. Go and look." I dropped the plank on the catwalk. I went into the cab. The logbook was closed. The wood scrap was on top of it, exactly as I'd left it every morning since July 15th. I moved the scrap. I opened the book. I turned past Ellison's final entry on September 14th, 2003. Past the blank pages that followed to the end of the written entries. There were new entries, 4 of them, dated August 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, written in a hand that was not Ellison's small, precise script. Written in a hand I recognized immediately because I see it every time I sign a check or make a grocery list. They were in my handwriting. August 8th, clear, temperature at 2100, approximately 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind calm, light present on north slope, bearing 357 true. Duration 37 minutes. Onset 21:22. End 21:59. Steady white point source, no diffusion. Stove interval 5.0 seconds throughout duration. Observer present and aware. August 9th. Clear. Temperature at 2100, approximately 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind northwest 2 to 3. Light present on north slope. Same bearing. Duration 34 minutes. Onset 21:19. End 21:53. No change in character. Stove interval 5.0 seconds. Observer present and aware. August 10th. Clear. Temperature at 2100, approximately 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind calm. Light present. Same bearing. Duration 41 minutes. Onset 21:25. End 22:06. No change. Stove interval 5.0 seconds. Observer present and aware. August 11th. Clear. Temperature at 2100, approximately 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind SW 2 to 4. Light present, same bearing. Duration 44 minutes. Onset 21:18. End 22:02. No change. Stove interval 5.0 seconds. Observer present and aware. I read those entries standing in the center of the cab with the logbook in my hands, and I want to tell you what I felt. But the honest answer is that I felt very little. A kind of whiteness, a static in the place where emotion should have been. Because the entries were accurate. Every detail matched my own notebook records, the times, the durations, the temperatures. Whoever had written them had been watching alongside me, recording what I recorded, present when I was present. Or I had written them and did not remember doing so. But I remembered everything else. I remembered every minute of every night. I remembered lying on the cot, hearing the ticking shift to regular, turning my head, seeing the light, standing at the window, watching, timing, counting. I remembered going back to the cot. I remembered falling asleep. I remembered waking up and writing in my own notebook. At no point in those memories was there a moment where I walked to the table, opened the logbook, picked up a pen, and wrote. That event did not exist in my experience. But the physical evidence of it existed on the page, in my hand, with the details only I could have known. Ellison's carving said, I went to sleep on the 7th and woke up on the 12th. And there were 5 entries in the book in my own hand. Sound to sound, I did not write them. He lost the memory of the nights entirely. I had the memories vivid, complete, continuous memories of being present and aware, and yet I had also, apparently, done something during those same nights that I had no memory of doing. Not in a gap, not in an absence, in a fullness. The memories I had were complete. There was no room in them for a trip to the table. And yet the trip to the table had happened. I was not immune. I was a different kind of affected. Ellison lost his nights. I kept mine, but something else was happening in them that my memory had been constructed to exclude. Not by erasing time, but by filling it so completely that there was no space left to notice the intrusion. I left the cab. I went down the 4 flights of stairs. I walked to my truck. I drove off that mountain in daylight on August 11th, and I did not go back. The project was finished enough. I called the district ranger from town the next morning and told him the structural work was complete, that I'd left some minor finishing details undone, and that I could return after Labor Day for a final walkthrough. He said that would be fine. He didn't ask why I'd left early. He didn't ask anything at all, which at the time I attributed to bureaucratic indifference, but which I've since thought about differently. I did go back, September 4th, for the inspection. The district ranger was there, and a woman from the Historical Society. And we all walked up the stairs together and into the cab in broad daylight, and I pointed out the features and the restoration work, and everyone said the appropriate professional things. The logbook was on the table. I didn't open it. The woman from the Historical Society picked it up and flipped through it and said what a wonderful primary document it was, and that they'd keep it in the cab for visitors to see. She did not mention any entries after September 2003, which means either she didn't flip to the back, or there was nothing there to find. I did not check. I did not want to know which one was true. The carved planks are still in my garage. 3 pieces of old-growth fir wrapped in a tarp on a shelf above my workbench. I haven't looked at them since I brought them home. I know they're there. I know what they say. I don't need to read them again. What I need, what I've been trying and failing to arrive at for the past 7 years, is an understanding of what I actually experienced on those 4 nights, because I have 2 sets of records. My notebook, which I wrote consciously each morning, and which records the light and the durations and my presence. And the logbook entries, which I apparently also wrote during the same nights, but have no memory of writing. And both records agree on every observable fact, which means that whatever wrote in that logbook, whether it was me in some state I can't access, or something else, using my hand the way it used Ellison's, it was watching the same light I was watching. It was present in the same room. It recorded the same data. It even noted that the observer was present and aware, which is either a statement about me or a statement about itself, and I cannot determine which. I don't go back up there. The tower is open to hikers now. There's a short interpretive trail from the trailhead, a few plaques at the base, and you can climb the stairs and stand in the cab and look through the windows and read the logbook and take photos for your Instagram. People do it all summer. Nobody has reported anything unusual as far as I know. But nobody is there in August after dark. The access road gate closes at sunset. The interpretive trail is day use only. Whatever arrangement the Forest Service made when they opened the site, whether consciously or just through standard operating procedure, ensures that no one is in that cab between 9 and 10 on August nights. No one is there to hear the stove ticking at regular intervals. No one is looking north. I think about Ellison sometimes. 17 years on that mountain. The first 14 clean, he said. Then 3 episodes across 6 years. By the end, he'd lost 9 days total, 9 days of logbook entries in his hand that he could not remember writing. 9 days when his body was in that cab, performing his duties, recording observations. But his conscious self was not present. Or, and this is the thought I cannot put down, once I pick it up, his conscious self was present. Fully, completely, just as I was. And something else was also present, also watching, also recording. And the two activities occupied the same body and the same minutes, without interfering with each other. 2 observers in one set of hands, 2 watchers at one window, and the only evidence that both existed was the doubling of the record. I don't know what the light is. I don't know what it does. I don't know if it's aware or mechanical or natural or none of those categories. I know it's real because I saw it. I know it has a precise geographic location because 2 people, 22 years apart, put a firefinder on it and got the same bearing. I know it correlates with the stove phenomenon and with the logbook phenomenon and with August. And I know that Ellison, after 17 years of trying to understand it alone, made a decision. He didn't report it. He didn't tell his supervisors. He didn't write it in the logbook where anyone could read it. He carved his warning into the underside of planks that only a structural contractor would ever remove. Because he understood that the person who would find it would be a person already close to the north window, already present in August, already at risk. He was right about all of that. He was wrong about one thing. He thought the warning would make that person leave. I didn't leave when I should have. And something used my hands because I stayed. And I remember everything except the thing that matters. And I have a set of planks in my garage with a dead man's testimony on them that I can't show anyone. Because the conversation that would follow is one I'm not equipped to have. If you're a hiker thinking about visiting that tower in August, do it during the day. Enjoy the view. Read the logbook. Take your photos. And be off the mountain before the sun goes down. If you're a contractor, and the Forest Service calls you about maintenance on the cab or the catwalk, and the work window they give you includes August, turn it down. Take a different job. There's always other work. And if you're already up there, and it's after 9, and the stove starts ticking in a rhythm, you could set a watch to, don't look north. Don't look north. Close the shutter and go down the stairs, and whatever you do, don't look at the light, because it's not the seeing that takes you. Ellison thought it was the seeing. I thought I was safe because I stayed aware. We were both wrong. It doesn't need you to be absent. It just needs you to be there.